All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to my channel. Today I'm going to be starting a little bit different of a sort of mini series, I guess. I've been putting a lot of thought into it, and I figured I'd go through, the 12 basic steps of any sort of 12-step program, and kind of give you the underlying principle behind each step as we go. Let me adjust that really quick. And so today is going to be the first of many. But regardless, I figured I'd just get started. So, step one of, I was in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and various other anonymous groups all over the place for various different things. And ultimately, as far as that goes, step one for Alcoholics Anonymous is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. But replace alcohol with any sort of issue, any sort of problem that is plaguing your psyche, your body, your spirit, any aspect of your life. And the first step to overcoming that issue is, as follows. So, we admitted we were powerless over X, right? Insert whatever problem into that little box where X is at, and it'll fit and it'll work. So we admitted we were powerless over X and that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, this is for the collectivist or collectivist mindset of the group thinking of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It's a certain programming, right? Computer programming. We're trying to program the mind here into a different way of thinking and living, so to speak. We, right? I can only speak for myself, which is why when it comes to personal accountability, I replace the I's or the we's with I's, and the hours with my, right? Lives with life. So, in the first person singular aspect, because I got to take care of myself first, I admitted I was powerless over X and that my life had become unmanageable. The underlying principle behind this step is honesty, right? Now, that's seen in the word admitted, right? We spoke the truth about what the problem was. If you have a problem with a drug addiction, an alcoholic addiction, gambling addiction, if you have a problem with lying to yourself, and whatever the problem is, the first step to overcoming that problem is being honest that there is a problem in the first place. If you can't admit to yourself and to anyone else that there's a problem, you're never going to get over that problem. If you break your leg and you're not honest about that broken leg, it's just going to stay broken because you're going to keep walking on it. If you have cancer and you're not honest about the fact that you have cancer, you're never going to be able to do anything about it. If what you're eating is making you sick, not being honest about it is never going to make you not sick, right? If you keep eating McDonald's and every time you eat McDonald's you get sick, the only way to first overcome that part of what's causing you to be sick is to be honest about it. And that's, hey, I have a problem. Every time I eat McDonald's, I get sick. And so that underlying principle of step one is honesty. right? First and foremost, you have to see that there's a problem. You have to admit that there's a problem. You have to admit that obviously something isn't going right here, right? And that if I held the power myself to overcome that problem, I mean, first and foremost, like, I would have done it by now. But that's the thing, the first step that gives you your power back, that power to choose, is honesty. You have to admit that there's a problem. That's the first step to overcoming that issue and once again achieving and receiving that power back. And you have to admit that trying to overcome that issue or trying to control that issue your way was just leading to nothing but more problems. I mean, I can't speak for anybody else. I know plenty of people just like me, but one issue that I used to have was trying to control everybody else around me. I tried to control my wife at a certain point, found out that didn't work. I tried to control my friends, I tried to control my parents, I tried to control my siblings, I tried to control teachers, I tried to control my AA sponsor, I tried to control everybody else around me, and the more I tried to exert what I thought was power, the more unmanageable my life became, the more problems that I had mentally, and with those mental problems comes physical problems. Right? With that mental warpage is going to come problems with the body. And in so doing, you're going to have some various emotional, spiritual problems. So, in order to bring back manageability, or at least some semblance of being able to manage your own life, again, first step, you've got to be honest with yourself first and foremost. You can try and lie to God, but that's not going to work because God already knows. And then on top of that, you can lie to anybody else around you. You can even try and lie to yourself, but as discussed before, lying is a symptom of hatred, right? God is love. Love begets truth, or God begets Christ. The opposite of that is Satan is hatred. Hatred begets lies, right? And lies, the Antichrist, ultimately just brings everything into a state of slavery. This is how ultimately addictions start in the first place, is by not admitting that there's a problem in the first place, by not being honest. I mean, so I've always found that every time I would go through a cycle of addiction where I found myself unable to control what I was doing, first things first, like say if I was drinking alcohol, what would always lead to the issues of me being unable to control my drinking in the first place was I would start to lie about it. I would lie about my intentions of why I was drinking. I would lie about how much I would drink. I would lie about who I was drinking with. I would lie about the things that I was doing while drinking. And all this did was ultimately result in guilt, shame, remorse, having splits in my psyche, that aspect or that concept of duality within the mind. I would be sitting there fighting myself. That's that internal contradiction. For all intents and purposes, an addict is one who contradicts. Addicts contradicts, right? So what is an addict? Someone who, while knowing that the action that they're taking is harmful, and while admitting that they do not want the results of harm coming into their life from that action, they still continue to do it, right? I know that, I know drinking alcohol makes me sick, but because it feels good, I'm going to keep doing it, even though I don't want to keep drinking. I don't want to keep getting sick. I want to do something better. I say one thing and do another, i.e., contradiction. Okay, and all contradiction is but a state of duality. So, how does one get out of duality? Right? And it comes back down to unity. So, in order to come to that state of unity, one must love themselves enough to want to change. Right? Love begets truth, begets freedom. Right? So, because I loved myself enough to want to change, I had to be honest about the problem. Alcohol wasn't the problem. Alcohol was but a symptom of the problem. The drugs weren't a problem. They were a symptom of the problem. And yeah, they made the problem worse because I kept trying to run from the symptoms by stuffing my feelings. I tried to run from feeling. It was like I didn't want to feel, didn't want to deal with consequences. It's called sidestepping natural law of the cause and effect, action, consequence. Trying to sidestep that universal law ultimately only compounds the issue further. So, again, I have to love myself, and love reveals unity, right? I have to love myself enough to bring myself out of this modality of darkness and emerge back into the light of truth. Okay? So, because I loved myself enough to change, and I looked at the truth, which was that I had a problem, and even more so, I had to look at the truth of what the problem actually was, and it was myself, from the very get-go. It was me and my attitude of how I looked at things. And when I looked at that with an honest desire to change, right? Honest desire. Honest. When I decided that I actually wanted to do something different with my life, then I gained the freedom and power to choose for myself, which then ultimately led back to more love. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to react that way, right? Sometimes through that freedom, we end up choosing something other. Right? And that something other can sometimes bring us back into that same cycle of duality, of addiction, of contradiction, internal contradiction, especially. That's a big one. Internal contradiction is duality, right? And internal contradiction is ultimately what brings us into that cycle of death. So, the solution, ultimately, at least part of the solution, starts with that first step, which ultimately comes down to honesty. Be honest to yourself about the problem. Admit that there is a problem, even if you don't know what the core root of that problem is, what the very base foundation of that problem is. Be honest about that there's a problem. And that's your first step to overcoming just anything, any sort of issue that you have, whether it's lack of finances, lack of courage, whether you're dealing with internal contradiction. You have to recognize that there's a problem before you can really overcome the problem. I mean, that's just how it works, And I mean, I learned that through AA. You know, I worked through the steps several times. And I noticed that my life would get better and better. And I noticed that when I stopped being honest with myself and I started chasing the things that I knew that brought me pain in the first place, in that unnecessary manner, that unnecessary suffering, when I got out of the modality of honesty and love and freedom, and started chasing after those things, that's when it all went south. And that's when I kept getting into that cycle of addiction again, when I would be dishonest about what it was that I was doing, why I was doing it, where I was doing it, who I was doing it with, when I was doing it, you know, how much I was doing it. I mean, that's exactly when I would start to go south, you know. So ultimately what it comes down to is, again, honesty, right? One's dishonesty is going to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks for any sort of spiritual, mental, physical, emotional growth. So that's what I got for this video. You know, just going to be kind of doing a breakdown day by day of each one. So thanks, guys.